Arizona's covered with canals, and these canals were actually covered with ceramic.
The philanthropic institutions and a lot of the museums that the philanthropic institutions fund had a very clear-cut dictate to rewrite history. What was the last catastrophe that hit North America?
I would say from the early 1800s to the mid-1850s, there's a big gap in newspapers and publishing, and then America comes online. The Industrial Revolution, the manipulation of these wars, displacement of populations, the insane asylums. Many geologists have said the American Southwest looks like a nuclear bomb went off. And it's like a huge web.
And boom, we're back. We were saying off camera that we missed Mike Winter's voice on AlphaCast. Shout out to Mike Winter. Shout out to AlphaCast. I know they were instrumental in my journey post-COVID nonsense. And I just, shout out to Mike Winter. Shout out to Mike Winter. And I'm saying that because I have a very wise old sage, although not old as maybe
Old Man River.
You've said that I've joked with you too many times now how much older you are than I am, but
no, it's not that I'm so much older. You just keep bringing up how close I am to your dad.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, my dad's just a couple years older than you. Like, I get it, Alec. I get it.
Okay, so for this conversation, we're going to be getting into a lot of things related to quote unquote Tartaria, maybe get into some of the Little Season stuff and just some of the history we've been sold and some different ideas on what has actually happened with that history. So to open up with a really broad question for you, Ben, and if you haven't checked out Ben's YouTube channel, The Archivist, I don't know, I think it's like, what is the actual username? It's all in the show notes, but
1_analog_9 is all of my social media.
Okay. And it's awesome. As Topher said, it's stellar. So to open up the conversation, I'd like to start with top of mind, Ben, what are some of the most glaring examples of holes, or I guess you could say outright lies regarding the primary narrative we were sold on the history of, let's start with the Americas first.
Geography, probably, and what's left over in that geography, whether it's fossils or castles, ancient construction, giant walls, burial mounds, pyramids. That's what got me into this. Was a good friend of mine. It goes by the name 13th Monkey. Probably pre-COVID, we used to spend hours on Google Earth. And he mapped more star forts than anybody else. And that was kind of the early fascination as far as like exploring actual land masses. And then, as you do that more and more stuff becomes blatantly obvious, like huge amounts of terraforming, canal systems that, you think the pyramid is hard to explain. You spend enough time on Google Earth, the list of things that are pretty hard to explain just becomes quite staggering. And he's from Europe. So I started to spend more time in the Americas. And again, I had this fascination with newspapers. So I was like, well, let's see what kind of explanations they were providing or things they were finding. And then stories I'd never heard of slowly started revealing themselves to me. So I'd say the geography of America and what lies within that, and kind of in a broad sense. Yeah. And, when you actually look at the narrative, there's like less than 15 star forts in America. But once we started looking through the maps and what available LiDAR there was and old Civil War maps, we found hundreds and hundreds. There's as many star forts in America as there is in Europe, which is a pretty crazy thing to say. But again, as we'll get more into this conversation, there was some or, one or several massive cataclysmic events that buried a lot of what America had. But yeah, that's, in a short answer, that would be my number one, is the remnants of something, and trying my best to explain that, or at least present information that at least I had never heard of, and most of my listeners probably never heard of. You won't find it in books Newspapers are kind of this niche where you find a lot of incredible eyewitness accounts and stories that you'll never see written anywhere else.
I know one of the biggest examples of that you cover in your channel is the Pablo Grande Donata. I think that's what it's pronounced, or that's what they termed it as.
Yeah, in Arizona.
Yeah, could you share some of the anomalies, in air quotes, there and some of the details related to that?
Well, yeah. So for any of your listeners that aren't familiar, I started a series called Anomalous America, where a long time ago, I was worried about the archive disappearing. So I spent probably 16, 18 months archiving things on a state to state basis. And this was before I was even sharing anything on social media. And yeah, so it started with Alaska for the series, and kind of the whole YouTube journey has just been me going back through my own archive, reorganizing things, and then kind of trying to make it somewhat of a presentable script, following a kind of script. But yeah, the Casa Grande stuff, it's in every state. First of all, let me say that. So this place you're bringing up is actually small in terms of the things that I've talked about in the Anomalous America series. But yeah, they actually described this in the oldest articles as having a similar outline to some of the circuit cities in China. And they found a lot of very interesting symbols. They didn't go as far as to say that it was some kind of Chinese script, but they said that it obviously wasn't American or tied to any of the native groups here. And they found mummies, and what's left of Casa Grande is what it's called today. What's left of it is, 1/100th of what was there originally. They tore down a bunch of stuff. It was been looted like most of these places. But yeah, that's actually part of a larger complex. My Arizona episode. So anybody that, wants to go further into this, and just using this as an example, they can go to the Arizona episode and listen to that, where I go in pretty deep detail. But since we talked a little bit about terraforming and canals, no state was more sculpted than Arizona. Arizona is covered with canals from north to south, east to west. And these canals were actually covered with ceramic. And
so we're not talking super basic canals. We're talking about pretty...
No, they still use them today. They were so advanced that we just repurposed them. This is the same story with the Erie Canal and a lot of other canals that we actually didn't dig, we dug out.
Yes.
We could go, you could even talk about Panama. I've shared quite a few of the first really interesting posts about the funding issues they were having with the Panama Canal. And really, it was just a big dig out system. It wasn't, they were just dredging pre-existing canals. That's the same with this area. But again, going back to Arizona, just to kind of give people an idea of the technology involved here, the ceramic base coat, which was the bottom of the canal, actually had radium-impregnated ceramics.
Oh, wow.
And when you get into how radium, at least I've talked about this in my radium series, I've hypothesized that they were using radium to grow massive crops. And not to get too off topic, because there's so many ways I could go with this, but they found mummies, with ancient grain, ancient corn, and they planted some of these grains and corns and found that they grew 3 or 4 times higher than the corn and grains we have today. So you take something like that and you add this, additional layer there of what I was saying to you about the radium impregnated ceramics on the bottom of these canals. We're talking an incredibly advanced civilization, building structures that are unimaginable. And, connecting this with the Colorado episode, I talk about the largest building ever discovered. And this is actual publication. They found a building they estimated to be 6 miles long. An entire building, not just a wall. I have walls that are hundreds of miles long that they never found the bottom of that still exist today. But yeah, these structures like the one you mentioned, the narratives that we're given today don't at all match the narratives that we were given, 150 years ago when they were first at least writing about them. And ultimately, many of the quote Native Americans describe an advanced culture that existed in the Americas long before their father's father, great grandfathers. They can't even describe the historical time frame that we're discussing. But yeah, I'm gonna ramble, so I'll cut you off. I'll cut myself off there.
With that, in the southwest of the United States, it really seems like something devastated it. With a lot of the geography of some of these old maps that you've unearthed and a bunch of other people have unearthed, they show that essentially California is like its own island. And then there's this waterway, there's this strait that separates that from Nevada and, Idaho and going up into Oregon and everything like that. And then you have like the Arizona, New Mexico area. And it seems like with a lot of what I've looked into, so much of the biblical narrative, especially like the I want to call it the Talmud, the Torah, excuse me, the Torah or the Old Testament, to me, it makes a lot of sense that there was like a very old ancient culture. One might even say megalithic, especially with what you just described. And so much of the land, the way these old maps show it, would fit that old biblical narrative much better than what the Middle East shows. Have you ever given any thought to that?
Yeah, of course. I've talked about this before. I've done a few other interviews where I've talked about the idea that Egypt is America and that the great river of the world is the Mississippi. Obviously, I'm not speaking in length or size or anything like that, but the kind of historical references to this grand river is the Mississippi and the cedars of Lebanon and on and on and on. But yeah, going back to what you're saying about California being an island, there's written account that used to be able to come up Baja and take a boat all the way to Salt Lake. And, obviously it's a Salt Lake. It was connected with the ocean at some point. Again, connecting how close to our time frame we can establish that. It's obviously very hard to say, but yeah, I've talked and covered multiple articles about ships they can't explain found all over Utah, ocean-going vessels covered in salt water, found underground. They found a Moorish Phoenician ship in a cave in Colorado, completely intact. Yeah, but lots and lots of examples. But there's even a lot of evidence to show that the Mississippi Delta was all hundreds of miles wide at some point. And just the fossil channel that exists in that area suggests that there was, I wouldn't call it an inland sea. I would say that, the Gulf of Mexico, or what it is today, extended all the way up into Canada. But yeah, there's been a lot of geological changes, and I think America is the least explored of this regions. I think Europe, when we, again, not to use the Tartary term loosely, but these kind of this idea that the past history of the world, even as recent as 150 years ago, has been drastically altered. And the references they use for some of these buildings around the world, Europe being probably the most prominent, America looked just like Europe. It was densely populated, tens of millions, if not more, people covered the entire region from coast to coast, Gulf to Canada. And I don't want to say it was just one. I'm sure there were more than one. Events devastated America. And I've gone as far in some of my other videos in saying that the Atlantean destruction, at least as it's recounted, was actually the sinking of America. And that for some period of time, a large portion of America was underwater. And the continent, go ahead.
It's amazing because when I was growing up, I grew up in South Florida. And Florida, for those of you that have never been there, it's very flat and it's about It's maybe a couple feet higher than the ocean. And we would go fishing. I was in South Florida, so I would usually go fishing and head, due south towards Bimini, the Bahamas. And we'd either head due east or due south. Either way, we would hit something called the Gulf Stream. And the Gulf Stream is this channel of water that's like super, super warm. So you'll be like, you'd have like your little Marantz or Lowrance, telling you the depth of the ocean floor, and they would tell you the temperature of the water. Then you'd hit this channel that, depending on where you were in it, it would like take your boat if you weren't like really motoring. The temperature of the water was about 10 degrees warmer than everything that surrounded it. The second you got to the other side, that's where all the fish were. And we would see on the depth finder, we would see these things that look like a pyramidal, like an actual pyramid, outline down in the ocean. And none of that stuff was ever corroborated for me until about 2010 when I read, what's his name's book? He read it. It's called Underworld, I believe it was. He's become really famous. He wasn't famous back then.
Graham Hancock?
Graham Hancock.
Dude, I was just about to bring him up actually because I have a question related to that. Go ahead though.
And so we actually called this one place like 3 miles off the right due east of Sunrise Boulevard in Fort Lauderdale. We called it Jurassic Park because you would be going and you'd be at like 400, 500, 600, 700 feet of depth, and then it would peak up, and there was a pyramid there, and all these huge fish were there. And so when I read Graham Hancock's book, when I was in Costa, I was like, oh my God, because he dove off all these different continents. So his work showing that, like, look, there were civilizations off all these continents. If you just drop the ocean level 400 feet and it's consistent off every continent, you have, 10x the population that we thought we used to have.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it doesn't take a genius to realize that outside of the advanced technological kind of world we're living in now, everyone would have lived on the water, at least the majority of them. Transportation reasons, trade reasons, livelihood, food, water, on and on and on and on. So any drastic change in sea level rise would have probably, likely, depending on obviously the severity and the speed, resulted in the death of a huge portion of the world. And whether that's melting icebergs or a flood or whatever, again, it's hard to say exactly. I doubt it's just one thing. It's probably all of those things at different periods of time. But yeah, Florida's a great example. I mean, I've done, I don't even know how many videos with Longo at this point, Old World Florida. We became friends because our research overlapped so drastically. But, people like Dr. Greg Little, who's done amazing work on Florida, the connections he makes with Atlantis. And what's that, the guy that did all the psychic readings that talked a lot about
Edgar Casey.
Casey's work is incredible. And the overlaps with my work and what Casey said are pretty drastic. And, it's like Dr. Greg Little. If you don't know who he is, you can look him up. He wrote a book kind of correlating his work with Casey's work and showing the things that he had found and the correlations he's made. He also has like probably of current note of people still alive, the most in-depth research into the mounds of America. But yeah, there's just, the ocean hides a million things and, without the funding. And obviously, as soon as you get into those types of waters with funding, it's a lot easier to cover things up. But, again, I stick to the land and what was being found there, but almost always the river played important parts. We just talked about canals, but yeah, I mean, it's pretty crazy to think what just 100 feet of sea level is concealed from historical fact.
That's one thing that I really like to point out to people also, just flat out when it comes to doing any type of development of heavy structures near water. If you're going to build near water, your job is tenfold harder. I have friends that are in the seawall business in South Florida and the Miami area. they get paid almost just as much to put a seawall around, a small piece of property as the house will cost. And it's because water likes to take whatever it's touching away. And the fact that you brought up that there were all these star forts, and we haven't even talked about the quote unquote Civil War forts that are in the middle of marshes, bogs, and the ocean. You, as a builder, are looking to get away from the water. You don't want to be in the muck. You don't want to be in the slog. Just to bring the heavy material is impossible. Like, my family had property in the bayou of Louisiana. And there's forts that they would come across hunting out in the middle of like the swamp that they hadn't lost their founding, their footers or their foundations, and were standing perfectly erect. It wasn't like the Leaning Tower of Pisa or anything like that. Whenever those buildings were erected, the environment looked a lot different. And all these seawalls, and like you're talking about to have a uranium-laced ceramic in your canals, you're talking about such a high level of development that it's absurd to think the historical timeline that we're told is anywhere even close to being what was so.
This is the question that I have too related to that. So we have Graham Hancock, who most of the people in this space are familiar with, who are interested in alternative archaeology and anthropology. And he talks about how there is some evidence that there were human civilizations in the Americas going back at least 100,000 years. I think that's what he postulates. But my question to you is, first off, are you familiar loosely with Hancock's work?
I've read all his books, yeah.
Okay. So I don't want to speak badly of that.
He's done great work.
He's done great work. I guess
everyone misses the mark.
Yeah, correct. I guess my question is, where do you diverge from what he puts forth? Because what I've gathered is that, yes, he acknowledges there was some sort of advanced civilization in the Americas. But in my perspective, granted, I've not read every one of his books. I've watched a lot of his stuff, though, over the years, and it's been quite some time, is that he acknowledges that they were advanced, but he kind of like distinguishes them as still much less advanced than us in many respects. At least that's kind of the impression that I get. And it's more of like, these are still a primitive people that had some advanced things. So I don't know if that's a fair characteristic, or a fair assessment, but that's kind of what I've gathered in my viewing of his work. So I'd just love to hear your thoughts on like, what do you think from your perspective and your research he's gotten right versus where you kind of diverge from him?
Timelines is probably our biggest separation. And I'm not tied to book deals and sponsorships or anything like that. So I'm not afraid to get weird. I go where the articles take me. And I think that's what's driven the fan base I've developed, or, community, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, that's going to be the biggest division, is that he's going to be scared to live on the fringe. Like, he blew up on this scene, but he was writing about things people have been writing about for 200 years. What separated Graham, in my opinion, was the diving. That's about it. The correlations he's made, talking about these historical sites, you have firsthand account. You can find books on firsthand accounts on most of the places he's visited, and they're going to give a much more authentic, honest opinion of those places. Central America, South America, Giza Plateau, whatever it is. But yeah, what drew me to him originally was his Yonaguni work, which then led me to reading his books and on and on and on. The diving stuff I love, since we already talked about what lies off just, a few miles of shoreline. Obviously that's a great correlation there. That's my sweet spot with him. His work has become like 50% archaeological and 50% psychedelic. And I don't touch any of that psychedelic stuff. I think that's everyone's personal journey and really has nothing to do with the kind of foundational work that made Graham famous, or at least, in this niche, so to say. But yeah, I mean, anyone can go to my channel, my YouTube channel, and just click on the playlist and see. I like the weird stuff. You read thousands and thousands and thousands of articles at this point. I like the really, really crazy ones. There's a lot of consistency for my general niche. There's a lot of consistency, ruins and burial mounds and giants and all that, right? Tagline stuff. But I have the other side of that that's even more fringe, I guess, in this circle of things. And, whether that's the vapor canopy, giant trees, again, I wouldn't be here without Mike Stellium. Me and Stellium have been friends for a long time.
Love Wilkie. Love that guy. If you remember, I was sitting next to him and I sent you a picture on Instagram when I was with Wilkie. I freaking love that guy.
I don't trust Extron heroes in Spain. I don't trust them.
Totally organically, aside from spending so much time together, continually overlapped. And, Graham Hancock, you're not going to hear talk about a lot of these things that we talk about, which is fine. I don't have any expectations for him. But yeah, short answer, I guess, even though that was a long answer, is it'd be the time frames and really touching the fringe, outlandish stuff about our geological, archaeological past. He's going to talk about, I don't like the alien shit. I don't touch any of that stuff. Extraterrestrial, I like to think more beyond the ice wall than I do outer space. We live in a closed system. I don't need to prove that. It's there by definition. But yeah, again, like I said, that's the beauty of, I don't make a living doing this. So I'm not tagged corporately to anything. So it allows me more freedom than him. I'm sure he had.
And it almost seems like he's trying to get the mainstream to acknowledge him to the degree that in some ways he might be willing to make concessions on, like, I'm not going to touch that stuff that could be perceived as crazy. Right.
All of them have to at some point.
Yeah.
Whether you're tenured or not, whether you're an independent writer or not, you're going to make concessions. And the larger your audience becomes, the more of them you're naturally going to make. Because it's like a pleasing process. You're like, oh, this is like my audience. I have to nurture this. But at some point, you have to cut your losses. And, again, I think that's kind of the sweet spot. Obviously, I make a tiny amount of money, but it's definitely not a living wage doing this work. And it requires an incredible amount of labor. But again, it also warrants me the freedom to say crazy shit that's in an article because I'm like, this is incredible. And it doesn't really matter if I lose a follower because I'm saying something outlandish, whether it's the shape of the earth or whatever it is. It doesn't really matter. Religion, I touch on anything. I go where the paper leads me. And I talk about the Native Americans being the true Hebrews, since you mentioned are the biblical lands America or the Americas in general. But yeah, I still respect Graham and there's still a lot of amazing stuff in his books. And I still recommend to a lot of normies to start with Graham. I think he's kind of where you get your toes wet, no pun intended. And, obviously my material isn't for everybody, nor do I want it to be. That would ruin the whole vibe I have going, I guess, to say. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. You gotta share what you're interested in. And speaking of these articles and things that you've read, you seem to, in many ways, corroborate each other. I'd like to focus on that a little bit. Like, what are some of the resources that you found? So you're looking at old newspaper clippings, and I know there's been a lot of people who've posted reels on Instagram and a variety of other places showing what appear to be giants and different artifacts that were allegedly taken by the Smithsonian to sort of cover up that there's actually more Egyptian-esque looking artifacts that have been found in the Americas, primarily in the southwestern part of the United States, and a lot of newspaper clippings and accounts associated with that. But I just love to hear what you have seen in terms of the corroboration between the different materials you found, where they're coming from. Are they newspaper clips from the 1800s, from the early 1900s? I'm just interested in that piece of it too.
Sure. And let me go backwards just a little bit. I'm just going to read you a little clipping from the late 1800s from an archaeologist from that time frame, from Oxford. Since we were talking about Arizona, and again, we're going to bounce around all over the place, which is totally fine. But I brought this up while Christopher was talking.
And by the way, before you get into that, your quote unquote long-winded answers, please continue them. Like, because it's almost like with this, you have done so much research that I don't know what I don't know, so I don't even know the depth of things to ask. So please feel free to ramble on as you want.
Yeah, and I don't want to obviously I'm on this show to kind of toot my own horn, but there's not a lot of polish to Anomalous America. It's a live show. I do it live. So there's a lot of stumbling and whatever. It doesn't really bother me too much, but the information is the prime focus. But since you brought up Arizona, I just did a quick little PDF search on my computer, and here's this little excerpt I clipped from a newspaper from the late 1800s. It's just a quote from Dr. Hamilton Bonnet of Oxford. The ruins of the oldest and least known prehistoric cities in America lie buried in the lowland sands of the desert wastes of southern Arizona. Dr. Hamilton of Oxford, England, has said that the buried cities of Arizona furnish the richest field for original archaeological investigation in the Western continent, and that these relics of human communities outdate the ruins and the cities in Mesopotamia and along the Nile. And I think that's a good little synopsis. But you'll find people saying that about all kinds of sites across America. In my Indiana and Missouri episodes, when I get into Cahokia, what they found in Mound City, which is now St. Louis, again, another amazing set of episodes. But he goes on to say, yet very few Americans who are familiar with the wonders of prehistoric exploration in Asia Minor and North Africa have any idea that in their own land are remains of a strange and wonderful people who built enormous clay temples, constructed extraordinary irrigation canals, and tilled fields before an Egyptian pyramid ever piled up, and who vanished from the earth centuries before Columbus was born. That summarizes all of my episodes. You could put that quote, attach it to a different archaeologist in Alaska who's going to go here and go, what the hell? Why does nobody talk about this? And then again, these are the guys top of their field. I mean, this is Oxford. We got people from Yale and Stanford and blah, 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 the oldest universities in the realm at that time. And, imagine what went into a journey to Alaska, to the frontier in Alaska in the late 1800s. I mean, that's a month and a half journey, and these people are living here for years. But yeah, correlations. And again, I apologize. I wanted to go back and read that just because I had it available, but now I'm forgetting what your original question was.
Quick shout out to Podigy, the team that we brought on to produce our podcast. We started working with them last year, and the difference was immediate. Way less stress on the back end for us with podcast production, and our YouTube has grown significantly since bringing on Podigy. If you're already running a podcast and looking to boost your production value, or if you're thinking about starting a podcast, I highly recommend working with Podigy. If you check the show notes, there's an assessment that Podigy has put together to give you specific steps to take to grow your own podcast. And that's whether you're just getting started or looking to take your current podcast to the next level. Each month, they're giving away a strategy call with their founder, Justin Moore, and he is incredibly talented and incredibly smart, and he really knows how to grow a podcast from the ground up. So if you're interested in working with Podigy, just head to the show notes and take the assessment. And if you decide to work with them, just mention AlexEc in the way forward, and they'll give you a nice little deal.
The original question was these newspaper clippings. I mean, that's a perfect example of what I was getting at. Where there seems to be corroboration between multiple sources. I guess what I'm getting at is it's not like you're reading one source over here who has this super wild take, and maybe there is some of this that you're finding that is completely contradictory to another take over here. What I'm suggesting is, from my impression of your work, you found multiple sort of pieces from different locations in the Americas that seem to corroborate, yes, there were giants, there were these ancient civilizations that had advanced, like truly advanced technologies that they were using. And there may have been this sort of, what did you call it again, where it caused the plants and trees to grow more, the vapor canopy. There's reputable sources that are sort of talking about things like this, and then also newspaper clippings to corroborate what they're saying as well.
Yeah. And so that's kind of the beauty of the whole Anomalous America series in a nutshell, is that I go state by state for the sake of showing anybody who's watching it from, hey, I'm a Californian and I'm drawn to this because I want to see what the California episode has, which is kind of like a lot of my comments are from people in that particular region or the state. So that's why I wanted to break it down. And also the reason too was when it comes to like searching through archives, it's easier to pinpoint things down so I can go to a specific state. Like before the Library of Congress was really as efficient as it is now, I used to have to go to universities. And not all universities are open to the public if you're not a student. So I would go to universities in Alaska or Washington or Oregon. And if they had a free available archive to the public, that's where I would start. But yeah, so now that I'm 20, almost 30 episodes into Anomalous America, which again, by the way, by the time this episode airs to your listeners, my next episode, Nebraska, will be out the first week of August. But yeah, the similarities are endless. Out of place relics, out of place tombs, out of place religious artifacts, you name it. Out of place megafauna, out of place animals. It's endless. Our idea of what Alaska was or is to the average American now was not at all what it was, I'm going to say, just a few hundred years ago. So when Graham Hancock's like, oh, here's what this archaeological state of frame looked like in the Nile 100,000 years ago, I mean, I think is absolutely ridiculous. I think all of these surface level, accessible in the last 200 years, 300 years, archaeological sites are very, very much more recent. Some of them I put maybe twice as far back as that, maybe 500, 600 years. But again, when I'm touching on ideas like megafauna and changeover event, antediluvian creatures, which again, antediluvian survivors is a series I have a playlist on my channel where I talk about all these creatures that nobody's ever heard of that were being hunted by royalty, all around the realm, dinosaurs, whatever you want to call them. I don't like to use that word, and I call them changeover survivors. These creatures that came from a time when the earth was a very different place. And again, the megafauna storyline where in Alaska, they're finding tropical vegetation everywhere. And that's all across the realm. Finding tomb burials that they call Etruscan. They're finding Etruscan tombs in Alaska. Again, whatever attracts you, you could just literally pinpoint focus on that one thing. Let's say burial mounds. If you spent your whole career with an open mind and reading, what material I presented, you could have several books worth of material that would completely rewrite our understanding of burial mounds from a historical reference, religious reference, all of these things. But then we could go into, insane asylums. We could go into Capitol buildings. I mean, again, it's such a rabbit hole that, again, I say this too a lot in my episodes, that I'm just trying to inspire people to, inspire their interests and make them want to go look into things on their own. And whether you want to keep a broad open view of things or go specifically down a specific rabbit hole, it's crazy. Topher have talked about this a lot. It doesn't matter what it is. Constructions or castles or star forts or canals or walls or any of it, you'll find, the actual narrative that we know of today is like, it could be farther from reality.
So, Ben, there's one thing that's been very, very clear to me that, John Taylor Gatto brought to my consciousness, and so did the C.W. Griffith like long way back, was essentially the philanthropic institutions and a lot of the museums that the philanthropic institutions fund had a very clear cut dictate from the top, from where the money was, to rewrite history. There are notes going back. When you look at the notes from the Reese Commission in 1951, they said that they were reading the notes from philanthropic institutions, the top 5 in the United States, as far back as 1898, all the way up through like 1913. And one of the stated objectives was to rewrite history. They literally said that. Now, this is the money. This is like the big money. This is the Guggenheims, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Mellons. Like, this is the upper echelon. And one of the things that they were very big in instituting, and this is John Taylor Gatto's work, was this whole notion of normalization. They wanted to normalize history. And by that, that means they plucked out the catastrophes. Now, you and I have talked about this in the past. I just have forgotten. What was the last catastrophe that hit North America? Like, when do you think that time frame was?
Yeah, it's hard to say because people use the term reset, and that could be something quite drastically different from an actual explanation, a fundamental level and timeline, especially. I like to paint with a broad brush because I don't know anything specifically, but just going off the material that I tend to focus on, I would say from like the early 1800s to the mid 1850s, there's a big gap in newspapers and publishing. And then America comes online. The Industrial Revolution, the manipulation of these wars, if they even really happened, displacement of populations, all of these things, the insane asylums. Again, it's like a huge web. But yeah, I would say what cataclysm, an actual event, I can't say for sure. But, many geologists have said the American Southwest looks like a nuclear bomb went off. And from a geological representation, or, if I'm holding the magnifying glass to that, my guess is 1500s, 1600s. Again, the maps kind of fall in that time range. Again, California as an island, those types of ideas, like what would it take to fill that whole central California valley in and erase that water channel? I can't say for sure, but correlating that with a reset, again, I use that term pretty broadly, but it seems like the entire realm was going through a changeover situation. And my sweet spot is the 1800s. It's hard to say more so Europe because I don't spend a lot of time with Europe on my channel, but there's plenty of good researchers that show the things that I point out in America were going on all around the world. These temple sites are covered over with 10, 20, 40 years of tree growth or more. Temples where grass is 10 feet tall. It's like, well, people aren't actually attending this temple or going to this temple. Angkor Wat's a perfect example. You look at the earliest photographs of Angkor Wat, it's a site nobody cared about. Nobody was going to. They weren't keeping it clean. It was abandoned. And that's everything. All of Central America, as you are aware, which is still being dug out today.
We've seen a bunch. I mean, like literally going down the main highway that's in the spine of the Talamanca Mountains, along the highest mountain range. You look to either the east or west, every 15 minutes or so, you'll see in the distance a perfect pyramidal, completely covered over with oaks. They call it roble down there. It's a type of oak. And you would it took a friend of mine that's pretty perceptive gentleman. And he's like, that's a pyramid. And I'm like, you're crazy, dude. And then it wasn't until the next bend where we were looking to the east. On that one, we were looking to the west, and the next one. And I was like, he's like, yeah. Like, oh my God, they're everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the beauty. I mentioned LiDAR a little bit earlier. For this community who have already been on the LiDAR game, I've been posting LiDAR pictures and talking about LiDAR for 7-8 years. But that's really going to change everything for, I don't want to say normies, but for the people kind of new to this material, these things that I've been saying where you're just kind of relying on a 150-year-old newspaper article, that there's now tons of images to substantiate this. I mean, once the entire LiDAR imaging is available for America, that whole thing about me saying 600 plus starports in America is going to become far more of a reality to people. Just in my quick perusing as the LiDAR archive grows, there's at least 250 that are easily visible, and you could go to them today, above waterline. They have been buried in 10, 20, 30 feet of sediment. But yeah, to go backwards, correlating an actual cataclysm date with the reset that I mentioned in the 1800s, it'd be tough to say, but it makes complete sense when you study enough of the occult, Masonry, the people you just mentioned, the Carnegies, the kind of overarching control system umbrella. You just dictate the money. You can't afford to go have a dig and hire a bunch of people without money. And they knew this. So all of the funding, you control the funding, you control the narrative. So even if you send somebody out, they collect all this information and that person's blown away, right? And maybe a writer takes what they're told by that individual. The censorship is a lot more difficult to control just because the centralization is so drastically widened in this time frame. Obviously, now that's not the case.
Can I share something on that? If you hold that thought real quick, Ben, because I want to frame this for the people who are listening, watching, because I know some people will still be very skeptical of some of the things that we're getting at here, and that's totally fine. But I just want to invite you to consider that we've existed through what we existed through over the last 6 years, the charade of COVID. And there are still people walking around today that are double masking, not out of like a political ideology. That's a separate category. I'm talking about like genuinely people doing these things or taking these measures out of genuine concern for their health and safety. And we're in the information age where we have like an abundance of information at our fingertips 24/7. And even with that, there are still a substantial amount of people walking around who are living in a complete inversion from what those of us that tune into this show know to be true. So if you go back just several decades or a century ago or 2 centuries ago, how much easier would it have been to sort of dictate what is commonly accepted and then to take the people who are outspoken that, no, this is not the truth, and sort of just do something about those people quietly. That's kind of where my mind goes with this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Ben.
Well, yeah. I mean, ultimately that'll take us down a rabbit hole that we could do a whole show on, and maybe we will someday, but we could just kind of look at the idea of insane asylums. And there's quite a lot of literature out there. People can look this up themselves, but the kind of things that got you thrown in an insane asylum were things like we're talking about right now. If you were a religious radical, whatever that meant, if you had a completely different point of view on the historical narrative or the religious narrative, that was enough. And excuse me. So you think like that, and what would drive a community, because we'll just say a community, even though obviously I've attached this to a much larger overarching power system. Let's just say you live in Wisconsin. Actually, we'll use my home state. In the 1800s, the largest building in all of Oregon was an insane asylum in Pendleton, which is a small town. Okay, way away from anything, away from the railroad at the time, away from water. And it was the largest construction in the entire state, not even near the largest city of Portland. Oregon was a barren state. There weren't a lot of big states like some of these other states, or a lot of big cities, I'm sorry. And you go, okay, what would it take? I have a bit of a builder's background. My father was a contractor. I have a kind of general consensus, having done the boots on the ground work and knowing what it takes to erect a building. What would it take to build a 230 room stone building in the middle of nowhere? It would take the entire state's population, essentially, because you have to think about quarries. You have to think about construction. You have to think about transportation. You have to think about labor. And then you magnify that and you go, okay, how many buildings like this were being built in America in this 5-year window? Oh, thousands? 1,000? Oh, and it's in a city that has a population of 400.
That's the biggest tell to me. The biggest tell. Sorry for cutting you off. I just have to say this because I get so aggravated about this. It is a population thing. You don't go build an insane asylum. You don't go build a post office or a city hall when there's like 8 guys there that have like 2 hours of free time. You don't do it. That does not happen.
And then you take states like Wisconsin, where there's 13 insane asylums. And some of them are unbelievably massive. I mean, it's bigger than all the Capitol buildings, bigger than anything in Washington, D.C., bigger than anything in Boston, New York. The biggest constructions in America in the 1800s were mental hospitals and insane asylums. So again, I just use that as a jumping off point based on what you're saying. Where would people who question the narrative or had a more grounded idea of our historical past? Well, you could look no further than the Native Americans, quote, Native Americans, and look what we did to them. I mean, that was purposeful. We implemented institution, schooling, medicine, and then eradicated everybody else that was grounded. Oh, you won't take our money? You won't attach yourself to this financial system? Then we'll just kill you and we'll squish all of you onto this tiny piece of land. Or even if your myths were still being told for generation after generation, they would never reach the masses of this new population.
On the Native American thing, I've thought about this so much, and I brought this up with Paul Stobbs when I interviewed him, just trying to reconcile some of the Tartaria-esque stuff that we're taught with the idea that there's like a nomadic population of Native American people that were very primal, that didn't have advanced technology and things like this. And I guess my question from a sort of large umbrella position is, what is your perspective on quote unquote Native Americans? What sort of tales, you kind of mentioned that earlier, did they have about ancient civilizations that were more advanced, that had big cities preceding them? And how have we been misled on that entire narrative?
Yeah, so some of these, remember, Native American is such a broad stroke. Many of these cultures were completely different. Ideology, religion, construction methods, hunter-gatherers, agriculturalists. It's no different than today. Or at least, let's say, early 1900s, late 1800s, where you had city dwellers and country dwellers. That was it. But obviously with some nuance there, religion and so on and so forth. That's the same with these tribes. But many of them, especially again from this time frame, openly say, we chose this life. There was the agricultural city people who built these massive cities. They were more advanced because, again, the hunter-gatherers chose that lifestyle. They wanted nothing to do with, they saw a lot of evil and disconnection. Even these advanced cultures that had this really crazy technology, what Antiquitech, whatever you want to say about it. The nomadics preferred a simpler life and chose it.
Sounds like what's happening right now, kind of.
Yeah, we're going backwards.
Right. Like it sounds literally like what's happening right now.
Without a doubt. These people were like, we've got a taste of this, or my grandfather got a taste of that, and he felt shallow and empty and hollow and disconnected from God, which was animal and life and the sun and the earth and the stars, all these organic principles that define all of us inside and out. It didn't matter if you had a city that was built on good principle and had advanced technology that was connected to the earth, and it was just this amazing new age thing. Ultimately it leads to corruption. That's how I look at it. Ultimately, over time, power corrupts, right? What's the phrase? I always forget. Ultimate power corrupts ultimately, something like that. And then eventually these, kind of the historical narrative with Atlantis, that it went well for a while till it didn't. And these cultures left that, whether it was they were smited by God. That was kind of a lot of the historical reference that these kind of chiefs in the 1800s made about these people, that a lot of these giant cultures and advanced cities were made by really not good people, or they were good at one time and everything went astray. And it's no different than like these cultures we have now. Like I had a farm. I raised my own everything. I remember the beauty of that. I live in the suburbs now. I miss it every day. I don't lose sleep over it, but I've walked both paths, and nothing is more romantic and simple and pure and beautiful than having no power, walking outside barefooted, picking fruit off your own tree, all of that. And these people realize that. And these are like I have a lot of episodes about modern masonry was taken from the Native Americans. The Druids and the bards were alive and well in these Native American tribes, and their languages overlap, their ceremonies overlap, their wisdom overlaps, the things that they held sacred overlap. And that's why they were pushed out. You could think of this, as like, to go back to the Casey work, the sons of Belial, which were this kind of evil sect that took over the powers of Atlantis and led to its ultimate destruction. You could think of that as kind of foreshadowing the world we're in today, where, again, I don't want to speak for all of your audience, but I would say the majority of them probably have a similar opinion that getting out of a city or a suburb onto your own piece of property and feeling the peace and the happiness that comes with that sounds pretty good. And maybe that's the direction they're moving in. Maybe not. Who knows? It doesn't really matter. They already have that understanding. And that's kind of the, which direction are you leaning principle. And yeah, it's like you said, the world seems to be waning back that direction. There's a lot of pushback with AI and whatever it is, technology-based industry, the control system and structure that comes with that. You have to make a sacrifice, no matter how you look at it. And these people living off the land, they were called savages. And they looked at the technology and the trains and the automobile, and they're like, I don't need any of that. I got a boat, I got a horse, I got land, I got water with the rain, I know the seasons. Like the freedom that comes with knowing that you can take care of yourself and your community, and you don't need any of the shit that the white man brings. That's empowering. Again, I use the term white man loosely because there were a lot of actual white tribes, so to say, white. Again, I get into the idea of skin color not even actually being a thing, and it's more of a modern conception. No one even described each other by skin color until the late 1700s, 1800s. But yeah, so we seem to, I think everything moves in circles, and this is a natural process that we're going through, and that there's going to be some growing pains. And, this community, I think, is predominantly full of people that see those growing pains coming and getting worse for the people that are really attached to this older system.
Ben, have you seen the recent creation from Spacebusters? Our friend Steve Falconer, he created this Apocalypse Infinity. It's a 3-part series. He has the first 2 parts out. Have you had a chance to check that out?
Yeah, he messaged me on Telegram, and I've watched the first 2 episodes.
Yeah, I was the second you talked about the bards and I get the term mixed up, whether it's the Druids, the Gaelic, those people coming over. I remember listening to you and Longo talk about how a lot of these from the timeline that we're given, let's just put it that way, that a lot of the Western European pioneers that were coming over, they would always have a Welsh person on the boat to actually help when they would land over here in the Americas, be able to communicate with the natives. And Steve Falconer's latest Apocalypse of Infinity goes deeper into that. it was so cool. One of my new business partners, he's down line from an Osage Indian. The Osage orange, they call them there's a tree here called the Osage orange. But the Osage Native Americans were the red people. They were like the tall red people. And his family, his French side of his family, the fur trappers, the French tradesmen that were going up and down the Mississippi, they kind of mated with the Osages. And then like that's where his family line is from. And there's a little bit of Welsh in there, they could actually talk in this ancient language that if you just look at the Western European history, they've tried to eradicate that. When you look at both sides of the Atlantic and you see, okay, we're going to eradicate it on both sides, that kind of tells you something.
Yeah. Even modern Gaelic has been manipulated a lot since the 1600s, 1700s. But yeah, I cover so many endless articles about people either trapping west or hunting west or just, people on adventures, people looking for a new start, whatever it was, finding their way up the Mississippi in this time frame and running into these different tribes. And I go a lot into the Mandans just because I covered the Dakotas quite recently. Obviously, those are my last few states. And, I could do a whole YouTube channel with just on content on the Mandan Indians. But yeah, the Celtish, again, a modern identifier term. There was a lot of the Gaelic words found amongst them, and they Hebrew existed amongst the priest class. They had Masonic rites. They met in caves. They had all kinds of rituals. They were, again, if we're looking at Old Testament style things, were tightly correlated with Israelite, or so to be labeled, practice.
We're talking about like quote unquote Native American tribes that are doing this, just to be clear, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So imagine you're a Scottish Mason and you're on an adventure or you're doing work, who knows what it is, and you're in the Mississippi Valley or the Missouri Valley, and someone in town says, "Oh yeah, there's a whole tribe 3 days journey west that wears a Masonic kilt. They wear tartan clothing. They have Gaelic words in their vocabulary. When they come to town, they ask for a Welsh speaker so they can translate." I mean, this is all like widely accepted. And it's not just that. There are so many examples like the Algonquins. Maybe it was Algonquin. It might be Iroquois. I might be getting them mixed up. But the Celts were openly trading and communicating with them. They have a lot of language overlays. And Micmac, the Micmac tribes of the East Coast, their language closely resembles the Basque language, which is an incredible language in itself. We could do a whole episode just on the Basque people and their historical idea that, they said that they left their homeland in the West after a cataclysm and found their way into the Pyrenees. But yeah, it's on and on.
RH negative.
Yeah. And the bloodline stuff, the term blood brother, are familiar with the historical reference that they actually used to mix their blood, and that RH negative or negative in general and positive bloods actually have a magnetic opposition to one another, and that they would actually mix their blood in their palm, and they could see just by doing that if they would coalesce or if they would repel one another. Again, take that with a grain of salt, but there's a lot of things like that where they had this kind of deeper understanding of culture identity. But take Central America, for example. I have a series called Archive Dive, where I unfortunately I've only done 3 episodes, but I've talked about this book called Queen Mu by Augustus Lepage. He was a archaeologist that was digging into ruins in Central America and uncovering ruins that no one had even said. They were completely overgrown by the jungle. And he spoke the Mayan language fluently. And he, with the help of locals, was translating what they could. In this time frame, the languages were still not nearly what they used to be. But he wrote a book about the archaeological finds he made and how they related to the story of Atlantis. And that Queen Mu was the Cain and Abel story was her lover and her brother, and they quarreled over marrying her. He was murdered, her lover, by her brother. She fled a cataclysm, a flood, and moved to the Nile. I mean, this is all in the book. And they worshipped her as a queen because even in Egypt, they said that their ancestors came from the red lands to the west. People have correlated this with a lot of different things, but her story overlaps quite nicely with that. She goes on to, kind of become the historical Isis. But yeah, again, I'm throwing little bits and pieces out there. And hopefully, again, if something stands out to your listeners, there's material for them to dive further into what I'm speaking of. But yeah, I don't want to get too far off topic.
No, this is good, man. This is super good. I know you're probably very tired of having people try to sell you supplements, and I totally understand that. When it comes to Heart and Soil, beyond a supplement, their products and their company and their values are very aligned with the way forward.
It is a bit of a misnomer to call ourselves a supplement company. We're a real food capsule company. We work on this energy principle of like for like, that you eat the organs that you want to support. Why would you want to support your heart? I don't know. Maybe you want a healthy heart as the vortex spiraling blood pumper around your body that's keeping you alive, or your liver because of the amount of retox and detox we need to do today, or your brain to lock in and have more of like a natural nootropic instead of leaning on more caffeine or more nicotine. So we have functional blends, most of which contain liver as the kind of hero ingredient because liver is the most nutrient dense food on the planet. We lead the way on transparency and quality. Every single step is tested for things like heavy metals, mold, and microplastics from the cleanest pastures and cows that you can imagine. Go to heartandsoil.co, go to the particular product that resonates with you, that you're interested in, and just read these customer testimonies. You're going to read stories about resolving PCOS or infertility struggles that lasted years, and people would take our supplements for 12 weeks and get pregnant naturally. If there's not a better testimony for something in the world than that, I don't know what there is.
So if you resonate with the principle of like supporting like, and you want to provide your mind, body, and soul with the highest quality animal-based supplements, head to heartandsoil.co and enter code The Way Forward, and that's The Way FWRD at checkout for 10% off. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about Heart and Soil, I highly recommend checking out episode 249. We go into all the things related to Heart and Soil and the nutrients that these supplements provide you. So we have these buildings that exist. Like I'm in Central Texas. The Texas State Capitol building is bigger than the nation's Capitol building in Washington, D.C. And it's so interesting, the perspective that I've adopted now versus where I was like 6 years ago, where it's wild to me trying to think back to that position where we're walking by these various Capitol buildings, post office buildings, government buildings, insane asylums that we all know about, and just walking around normally as if like, yeah, these people in the past built these with hammers and chisels over the course of a few years. And like, doesn't seem to be that we can replicate any of these things in those time frames. Like there's no questioning of it. It's just like accepted that like, yeah, that makes total sense. And then now seeing it with a new lens, it's like, how the hell can people walk by that and not question how this came to be, given the narrative that we are taught to accept surrounding it? But we have these buildings that are primarily occupied by government in the United States, which is interesting. And Topher, you had that line in the first episode that I had with you where you're like, guys that wanted limited government, if not zero government, while they were fighting a 3-front war against the French, the British, and the Native Americans, erected these massive buildings that are ornate with engineering perfection, using hammers and chisels, quarrying stone thousands of miles away in some cases, to government. Like it makes zero sense. It's ridiculous when you really think about that. But we have these buildings, right? And then we have some of these other things that you're referring to, and then the things that Graham Hancock refers to, that's like an ancient civilization, like who knows about the timeline, but things that are buried by mounds, whether someone actually brought in dirt and threw it in there, or when it came to California being an island, they filled in that land, or was it a cataclysm? What I'm getting at is where is the timeline in your mind between these buildings that we are still occupying as people versus the things that have been buried? And is it that it spans the course of history to a large degree, and this is just what they've kept around with a new narrative associated with it while trying to cover all this stuff up? Or did various cataclysms or a major cataclysm occur that covered up all that stuff? Here was the remnants of it, and they came in and they're like, we got to change the narrative surrounding this stuff. This is the accepted narrative that we're going to share with everyone. This is who built these things. This is when it was done. And that's what we're going with. I hope that question makes sense. I'm just trying to like piece together the past, quote unquote, ancient stuff that seems to be older with this stuff.
It's 2 stages, if not 3 stages, because you have, and the mounds are a perfect example. And that's why I cover them in every single state, because you have up to 3 levels of burials. And the archaeologists in this time frame, again, 1700s through the late 1800s, early 1900s. I almost never go into the 1900s, but I do occasionally say the same thing. You had a culture with almost the same beliefs. The sun, they worship the sun, not like we think. They worship the ground. I mean, again, like we mentioned again with the symbology of tilling the ground and living off the land, all of these simple things that we get lost in the complexities of modern day life and technology and all these gadgets that just distract us and make us numb and dumb, that we think that these people were savages. But really, they're the smart ones. They're the happy ones, content ones. But anyways, it's stages. And the mounds show this quite clearly, that you had a group and a race with different clothing, different skeletal structures, different heights, with different relics in their burial chambers, to another layer of people with, again, different, all of those things different, buried on top. And then the third. And the third would be what we were calling Native Americans or Indians in the 1800s. Can I say that the third, the very bottom of that, was related to some of these ancient, huge buildings? I don't know for sure. I can't say. But when do I think these massive, quote, Tartarian buildings came? That's going to be your third system or set or group of people. Because again, the asylums, the Capitol buildings, the schoolhouses, all this stuff are all in the same time frame. They're all mud flooded, whatever you want to call that, where you're taking stairs to the first floor. The basements are all 1 to 2 layers below ground. The construction is all very similar. We can focus on just that, but there's another race before, whether they were building these massive stone structures like the canal systems we were talking about. They're obviously separate. By what and how many years, I can't say. California is my best example of a state where they show several different kinds of cataclysm. They talk about a flood. They talk about some kind of plasma event. They literally say that. They say a modern day Pompeii, where people were frozen in place. And then they talk about in lava flows that are 100 feet thick. I have articles in the California episode and Nevada, I think, where they find a whole city 100 feet below lava flow, a whole city. So it's many things. And I can't say exact anything on what and how defines the levels between each of those. But again, the Tartaria quotations with the cities that I go into, because we have modern pictures and drawings and relatively current historical explanations for these cities, where people are literally going to work every day in these buildings. I touch on that the most because there's the most material. But we have no authentic, trustworthy explanation for how and why and when that civilization began and ended. I think that's when I was talking earlier about other researchers have done a great job of filling in the gaps that I presented in America worldwide, and showed that, a lot of these photos from the 1800s were these massive European cities are completely empty, which makes no sense. People say, oh, well, they're taking them first thing in the morning when nobody's out, or they cropped out the carriages and the people. Again, it's not, I don't believe that's possible. I talk about the vanilla sky, where all of the high res older photos from the 1800s have the entire sky completely cropped out of the images. I postulate on reasons why. I don't know for sure, but again, I would say the sky is full of incredible things. But yeah, since you mentioned Texas, I'm going to give you the chance to respond to what I just said there. I have a bunch of articles pulled up.
No, keep going.
And for your listeners, I'm just going to I'm going to give a short little snippet of articles I cover in my Texas episode to give people an idea of the things I talk about and maybe intrigue them to dive into an episode. And it covers subjects we've touched on lightly through our conversation here. Lost Race of Texas, 1891. A prehistoric city near Galveston engulfed by a tidal wave. Relics of a prehistoric race discovered. 2,000 human skeletons. Ancient city submerged, drowning all the inhabitants. Skeletons of whole family. Relics, ivory beads. Again, that's a synopsis of the article. Interesting prehistoric ruins. DC, 1893. The Great Wall of Texas. Prehistoric wall discovered on the frontier of the Lone Star State. Passes through Milano. Over 20 miles found so far, built of solid masonry, 10 to 15 feet high, many feet thick. As great as the Chinese wall. Again, this is what these authors are saying. 1926, forest turned to stone. The most marvelous petrified forest known to man has been found by two geologists in a remote valley of the Big Bend region, nearly 100 miles from the nearest railroad at Marathon, Texas. Petrified tree trunks of 100 to 150 feet were found standing, and others of a size and diameter and length unparalleled in the world had fallen. One of these was 896 feet long. The valley in which this stone forest was found is split by a deep canyon. Its surface is covered by a thick layer of volcanic ash, which evidently came from a long extinct peak in the neighboring Chiasis Mountains, but long after the forest had passed into its petrified state. We haven't yet learned all there is to know about the land in which we live. And I'll do one more here. A Texas wonder. Prehistoric pavement. The mound is square-shaped with sloping sides. Petrified wood covering the summit. An acre and a half. So what they're saying is it's a pyramid with the top off, like missing its capstone, or, I'm just giving people the visual. The top is an acre and a half of this pyramid with petrified wood planks. Mathematical precision. The mound is made of blocks of stone, split and sawed at the upper surface. So I'll stop there, but I have dozens I go into in the episode to give people kind of a taste of the things I cover. But yeah, that's one of maybe 20 I talk about. So stone pyramids, ancient buildings, ancient walls, petrified forests. I mean, you heard that one. A 900-foot long tree, petrified, turned to stone. I have other ones that they pull out that are 1,000 feet long.
So the petrification thing, that totally lends credence to the notion that the Southwest and the Southern Midwest, being Texas, essentially got devastated by some sort of plasma apocalypse. Because petrification, we know this is proven out in modern day science and engineering. You can petrify. You can take a cellulitic material like a piece of lumber. If you run enough voltage through it at a certain frequency, you can instantly petrify it. You can petrify a person almost instantly. Yeah.
Plasma. Yeah. I mean, I know linemen that tell stories about linemen that have, some kind of incident happen and men's hands and feet have turned to stone.
Yep. Yeah, one of my first neighbors down in Costa, that he was a lineman. I was asking him, how did he get paid so much? And he was telling me literally, he was like, well, I'm the last one of us. And I had no idea. I had no idea what he was talking about. He's like, yeah, I've literally seen guys, get electrocuted, have 500,000 watts go through them, fall off the line with the rigging and hit the ground and shatter. Oh yeah. Yeah. He was doing the long tension lines. And so he got paid a lot of money, but he was a very depressed man because he was like the last one of his cohort, to be around.
Yeah. And so to kind of go backwards on that petrified forest one, the narrative, right? The most prominent example of the petrified forest is the one that people talk about in Arizona, right? And the historical narrative is that they give you is that they were petrified by being buried underground for hundreds, if not thousands of years, if not a million years. But in that article, it quite clearly states there are 900-foot trees on the ground above the surface, not buried. And then there are trees that are broken that are still 200 feet tall sticking out of the ground. So you have trees that are still vertical that are snapped, and then you have trees that are laying down. So that article is great because it completely blows it out of the water. And I don't want people to think that I'm looking at one article. I have a dozen or more just like this in several states. In my home state of Oregon, they found an entire forest with the fruit still petrified on the trees. And the fruit was very large. They found coconuts in Colorado that were like this big, where the whole inside of the coconut was turned to crystal. They found acorns that were like bowling ball size. So again, going back to the whole megafauna gigantism idea that for the vapor canopy and the oxygen levels to be at those kind of states where life was much larger and the oxygen levels were so large, the vapor canopy, and there's a lot of material out there for people if it's their first time hearing this and they don't want to go watch my material and they want to just look into that. There's a lot of great material out there. But again, taking another step back when we talk about those three layers, I go even further, which again is how kind of like me and Mike's material, Stellium 7, our material overlaps. I say that there's an even more magical time frame where stuff like this was going on. Trees were a mile, 2 miles tall, if not larger. And the creatures were mountain size. I mean, look at his Mount Go work. If you can't watch that Mount Go stuff, just from the way he breaks it down on a biological level and just look at that with an open mind, then I don't know if there's any hope about any of this stuff, whether it's Tartaria or insane asylums or whatever. But that, I remember doing interviews and talking with people, and that was too fringe for them. But that's where my comfort zone has been for like 6, 7, 8 years. Is on the outside.
But it's interesting though, like in Wilkie's defense for the people who are skeptical, like I found multiple people in my audience who listened to my interview with him. When they first started it, they're like, this is batshit crazy. And then when you actually listen all the way through to what he's saying and you show how many points of crossover there are between a typical elephant and its anatomical structure and that of Mount Go, it's like, it's
impossible.
It's impossible.
It's 1,000,000 to 1.
It's impossible, man. It's impossible. Exactly. Then there's two primary. Sorry, go ahead.
No, please. I've done a lot of talking, so I would like to.
Dude, I appreciate you doing a lot of talking. So there's two primary things that I want to cover. I also want to be respectful of your time. So how much longer can you go?
Go as long as you want.
Okay, so there's two things that are top of mind right now, and I'm sure I'll have some questions in this. And Topher, please feel free to jump in with any questions you have too as well. So it's interesting to me. I looked this up, and again, this is a superficial search right now, but it's estimated that roughly 2.5 million acres of America's parks are closed off to human beings. Like no drones are allowed to fly over it. You're not allowed to visit aspects of it. And I know like some of the biggest areas for that are in Arizona, but I'd love to like push that towards the Smithsonian conversation. Like how many artifacts based on your research do you think have been taken and then given to the Smithsonian and they've locked it away somewhere? Like Egyptian artifacts are other artifacts from newspaper clippings that you found. And what are your thoughts on the parts of our national parks that we're not allowed to visit?
I think we're about the same age, Alec. I just turned 40 this year, and I'm sure, what are you, 39, 38?
34.
30, okay. So I'm a little bit older.
That's all right.
Well,
remember, I made that point to Topher.
He's going to start calling you Dad, Ben. He's going to start calling you, hey, Daddy.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's okay. But anyways, Indiana Jones was a huge movie for me as a kid. And I don't know if you know where this is going, but
I'm still a millennial, dude. So I'm not Gen Z. So like I know what Indiana Jones is. So we're good. I've seen Indiana Jones.
In The Last Crusades, they end the movie by panning out in the Smithsonian's room of treasures where they hoard all their artifacts. And it never ends. They don't even zoom out to the end of the building is like literally infinite, essentially. So I love that reference. And for people that are of age to understand it, I like to make that correlation. But yeah, the Smithsonian was always the highest bidder. In any article I come across that I reference in Anomalous America, and I reference them in other videos, but I predominantly do in that series, it's always them buying things. If they couldn't bully you or convince you to donate whatever it is you found, they were always the highest bidder. In my Antediluvian Survivors, I talk about the Smithsonian being one of the primary sponsors of a big game hunt for dinosaurs in the Congo. These kind of big game hunts were happening all around the realm. They were sending people out to South America to kill giant sloths. I mean, sloths that were 20 feet tall. That people were
milking. They were domesticating giant sloths too, right?
And milking them. Yeah, that's what I just said. Yeah, they were. Yeah, there's articles about that. It goes on and on. So anyone that likes that.
I hope it was raw. I hope it was A2 raw.
Oh, I'm sure. You can only imagine. You think camel milk's the highest quality? No, the giant sloth milk.
That's
for
so
sure.
funny because I know a lot of people who have helped reverse a lot of like neurological conditions in their kids who have been diagnosed with autism, really just vaccine injury using camel's milk. So wonder what sloth milk does.
Donkey milk, baby. Donkey milk.
Yeah, I mean, well, raw milk is one of the most powerful healing agents in the world. But anyways, not to get off topic. Yeah, the Smithsonian was not only traveling to these remote places to purchase these relics all around the world. Think of the network that would be required to do so. When we're talking, this guy in Huntsville, Alabama, has got a dinosaur. They killed it. They just killed it. They didn't find it in the ground. They just killed it. It's a literal, again, they weren't always using the word dinosaur. They usually said giant lizard or reptile, even though these things weren't often reptiles. They couldn't really describe them. They had like reptile skin, but they were covered in hair. Anyways, and then it would take 3-4 weeks of the town carrying this anomaly around, showing people, collecting a fee for outside visitors. And then, it took this guy or this group of people 3 weeks to get there. And I have articles where they talk about train cars that undisclosed amount of money was issued to this group of people, like a whole group of miners excavated dozens and dozens of massive skeletons. And they never once said dinosaur, of massive, predominantly sea creatures. Train cars load. And the Smithsonian bought it all. And that bounty one I was telling you about, where they didn't put up all the money, but they put up a big chunk. It was $5 million. And this is in the early 1900s. There's one of my favorites is from Anomalous America, Utah, where a gentleman found a dragon, a whole skeleton of a dragon. And it wasn't even faux pas in the article. They basically just said, this is the first entire one. We find bits and pieces all the time, but this is the first one in good shape where the wings were still perfect. Because I guess the wings get damaged a lot. You imagine some kind of cataclysm where these things are being, who knows, just rolled over by lava, ash, giant tidal waves. I don't know. But anyways, he keeps it secret and is just and the article's saying this verbatim, that he's offered this amount. He says no. He's offered this amount. He says no. The Smithsonian guy shows up. These people knew that they could just wait until the number was right. And often the Smithsonian was the one with the right number because they were offering blank checks, it seems like, in this time frame. And they bought the dragon. He wasn't allowed to tell anybody the cave it was in. Nothing. You never heard another article about it again. In Colorado, Anomalous America, Colorado, I go into the governor of a particular area. He may have been the governor of Colorado or could have been the territory. Again, it's been so long now, I can't remember for sure. Was petitioning Congress because the Smithsonian was going into Colorado and stealing artifacts all over the place. And he had no jurisdiction. He couldn't do anything. He's like, they're stealing everything. In fact, his words to the government in DC were, these people are stealing mummies and many other artifacts and shipping them to Europe. And I've postulated this because I've found articles like this many times, that most of what we understand as European mummies, again, the Nile, Giza area, were actually mummies from America. I had an interview I did with my friend Greg at the Higher Side Chats that he reposted recently that got over 1 million views about my discussion talking about these mummies. And the most powerful version or representation of this is the Mammoth Caves in Kentucky. They found thousands of mummies. That cave system was a burial chamber for thousands of mummies. And yeah, so I've got dozens and dozens. I'd say probably over 100 now of mummy-like burials. Some not advanced, some very advanced. Some where they're wrapped just like they are in the kind of narratives we're given, the kind of Egyptian narrative. Writing. One continuous cloth is a really powerful one I remember, where the mummy, they unwrapped the mummy and it was one piece of cloth and it had inscriptions on the entire length. Now, the only other modern, I don't want to say modern, examples of this are the Etruscan tombs in Tuscany in northern Italy, where they opened some of these Etruscan tombs and found the same thing, that they were incredibly elaborate and complex, and they had an inscription written on the entire length of the binding that wrapped the person that was buried. But yeah. So again, a long-winded answer, but
on the national park thing real quick too. So it's interesting, just going back to the 2.5 million estimated acres that we're not allowed to visit within those national parks. And then of course, no drones are allowed to be flown around. One thing that's super interesting, and I remember thinking this was incredibly weird when I visited Mesa Verde back in 2018. So I was already hip to, well, dude, it's all
cave systems.
Yeah, it's cave systems. Well, what's so interesting is the museum is, I don't think it's owned by the Rockefeller family anymore, but the Rockefeller family played a huge role. It's literally, there's a plaque that says this museum was created in large part by the Rockefeller family. So it's so interesting how obvious it is now in hindsight that so much of this was covered up by these primary families, as Topher was getting to. But do you think that this is super speculative and this is a very broad question, that we're not allowed to visit some of these places because there are still so many remnants of some of these things available for us to see?
100%. Let's just use the Grand Canyon as an example. The no trespassing, I don't want to say it's the largest amount of acreage of state land in any state. I doubt it is, but it's up there. And it's 100% because of people that were exploring into these areas where they just didn't have enough control or enough stuff was discovered that they just have to, that's the best way to relegate it, is to turn it into a national park. It's like, have you seen Missing 411 or familiar with their material? He correlates all the anomalous activities that go along with these national parks. And it's no different than people that have shown the missing case studies that overlay perfectly, not only with national parks, but tunnel systems. And another great part of the channel is when I talk about cave systems and the people inhabiting these cave systems and the ancient burials and cities that they were finding in these cave systems. Inner Earth and Agartha and all these things. I love all those ideas, and I go deeper in some states than others. But I have a video. I can't remember what it's called. Deep underground military bases. I think it's in the Nevada episode where they were hundreds of miles in all directions and never reached the end. I mean, they literally said that we don't have enough money to explore the ends of these tunnels. And they postulated that you could take a boat underground from coast to coast. And this is in the 1800s. And I told you about the boat they found underground in Colorado in perfect form. It's like Goonies. I live right next to where Goonies was filmed and where the story was. And I was on another show with a friend of mine where we talked about the Fusang people, the story of Fusang, which was this ancient Chinese culture that existed on the west coast of America. And, the Chinese were building boats people often overlook. They were, they talk about the boats that Columbus came on. I've seen full-size one-to-one reconstructions of these boats. I'm like, what a joke. And then you look at the Chinese junks that they were building hundreds and hundreds of years before what the Europeans were building, and they're unbelievably massive. Again, the holes in the narrative, it's like Swiss cheese. You just keep finding them where you go, no matter what. But yeah, the national park stuff, I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but for me, it's 95% tunnel systems and what that means.
Ben, with the tunnel systems, because this is another thing I like to point out to people, is whether you're going really high in the sky or you're going very low in the ground, either direction you get from grade, it becomes a lot more difficult to build. Out of the percentage when you're doing your Anomalous America series of these, archived articles about these older structures, what percentage of these structures had underground tunnels and caves? Let's just talk about engineered, like things that were engineered by man. What percentage had that?
All of them. I mean, again, I don't want to say that for certain, but more often than not. Going back again to what I was mentioning slightly with Cahokia and Mound City, St. Louis. One of my favorite examples of this is when they were building the footings, when they were putting in the pylons for the bridge that connects St. Louis with Cahokia. They're blowing out the bedrock. They built those structures that isolate the water, so they could actually be on ground level in the river system when you're building a bridge. This is common. I'm spacing what they're called when they put the pylons in. And they're dynamiting the bedrock as they're placing the footings to build the footing for the bridge. They blow their way into a tunnel under the Mississippi, and they find a tunnel system that connects all of the pyramid structures and mounds in St. Louis all the way across the river with the pyramid systems in Cahokia. And they say this tunnel system doesn't just connect these two mound systems, it goes to other mound systems. They leave it there. They don't say anything else. It's the only article I've ever found about it. But in that article as well, they elaborate. Yeah, when we were excavating, trying to find the bottom, they never found the bottom of the pyramids in Cahokia. They broke into tunnel systems all the time. So it's totally frequent. And they're saying stone. These aren't mounds of earth. They're stone pyramids. And the base is submerged several stories below ground. So the tunnel systems, I have, again, lots of articles. We could do a whole show just on the crazy shit they find underground. But yeah, I think a lot of these mounds aren't just burials. I say this all the time. There are ones that are just burials, and then there are ones that are buildings. Utah had a bunch of these. Nevada had a few where, again, when they excavate, they don't find the bottom of any of this stuff. It's like the wall I mentioned earlier in Texas. Rockwall, Texas, which maybe you're familiar with, is off limits to do any digging now. But when they first started excavating the wall, they never found the bottom. Never found it. And the blocks get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I talk about this layering, the kind of cyclopean idea, and other researchers have touched on this with sites all around the world, Peru, many places, that it almost looks like you're dealing with one set of peoples building one way, and then a kind of copycat group that still has some of the technology or ability above that. And then a third example where it's incredibly crude. The cement is not even remotely close to the same composition. The stone cutting is absolute garbage. There are lots of examples like that in America as well.
And doesn't the scale always go from large to small?
Yeah, it's the opposite. More advanced, and far larger in scale. And it gets smaller and smaller and smaller and worse and worse and worse.
So that leads me into a very popular word that's being used in everybody's vernacular now is the term Nephilim. You know, I grew up with grandparents that were Christian, and I lived on a farm in Tennessee, and my grandfather found a femur that was this big, which was the equivalent that the person that would have a femur that's that big would be about 10 foot tall. And so in my family, it was never a problem to say that there were giants or that there were Nephilim. And now, as of late, it's like it's getting more and more popular. And when I look at these massive door arches, as somebody who builds for a living, to set a big, heavy door correctly is one of the most difficult things to do in construction.
Yeah, let alone 5, 10, 30,000 pound doors.
Exactly. With hinges that are like, 4 feet long, just to fabricate, like from a metalworks perspective, hinges that are the size of what these are showing, to me implies, because, it just implies that the biblical narrative of things that there were giants in these days. And getting back to what we started this whole thing talking about was like, it seems like the old world or the Torah-based world was the US, if not the whole world, but like we know here in North America with these massive buildings that are all over the place and like you said, these massive wall structures and stone structures where the older stuff is the biggest. Like that stuff, like I have this corollary in my life right now. My dad built skyscrapers. He's older than me. I build little domes. I'm stepping down in size. Well, maybe we did get this technology from the Nephilim, from the giants at some point. And it just seems like we have so much evidence that whether they were Nephilim or not, they were the people that were building some of these older structures were just really, really large individuals.
Without a doubt. I mean, you could say, oh, their technology was advanced. That's certainly possible. But again, it doesn't explain the size. Efficiency is king in construction.
Absolutely.
And none of it makes any sense. It's not efficient. And as you're aware, as weight goes up, precision must increase with weight. So when we're talking about a door that weighs 10, 20,000 pounds, the precision that goes into making your everyday household door to that door, it's not just, oh, it's bigger. And then the moving and the construction, it's the precision. For a door like that to swing on its hinges, and then the actual construction technique and practice that goes into supporting that door, the hinge itself, all of the math involved it goes from like you need to be in this 10 percentile to like 0.001 percentile of efficiency for it to function properly. People don't think about that. And so it's not just a size thing. The size thing already doesn't add up. And you wouldn't build something like that for a 6 foot tall, 5 foot tall person. The efficiency doesn't add up. None of it makes sense. And this is what I mean, that it all unravels. It doesn't matter where you choose. As soon as you have that glint to question something, it will snowball. I mean, that's the way truth works. And I'm not saying that my opinions I'm sharing here are truth. They're my opinions, but reality is reality, and it's going to set in with you as soon as you knock and the door is opened, right? The added phrase there, the narrow is the path. Once you set out on it earnestly and honestly, and you actually investigate, you're going to be blown away by, it doesn't matter if it's COVID. I know so many people in my life that's where it started, was COVID. That was kind of like the eye-opening thing. I remember talking about stuff like this 20 years ago. And you can imagine how difficult it was to find people like you guys.
Shit, it was difficult for me in 2016, dude. I can't imagine 20 years ago.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a beautiful thing. And
I had to go join an ashram in India to talk to people about this stuff. I had to go international.
Yeah. And, we touched on at the beginning the kind of reverting back to so-called primitive ways. And I think that culturally, these are people that they realized that was, I don't want to say the right way, but by far the more natural way. And I think that culturally, I want to say it's the Buddhists. They talk about that there's three kinds of human. There's like the self-reliant, self-thinking, self-governing individual. There's the polar opposite of that. And then there's kind of the AI robot that literally doesn't even think or is completely unaware of itself or its surroundings or questions anything. And as I get older, that seems to ring more true. And I think whether or not we came from a realm where that didn't exist and we are all very similar, kind of the Garden of Eden idea, the age of innocence, the golden age, whether that was a reality or myth, I don't know. I like to correlate reality and myth to be kind of somewhat reliant on one another. But yeah, Alec, I sent you a link. I text you a link, and it's for every Anomalous America episode. I made a thread on Twitter. I know a lot of people don't use that anymore, but it just makes it super easy for people. And I post the link in all of my YouTube videos. So like if you don't have time to sit down and watch a YouTube video and you're more interested in actually reading the articles, I post all of those there, and so people can find them easier, just to give you an idea. And since you live in Texas, you can kind of look a little deeper into the stuff I posted in the episode. But yeah.
On the Nephilim thing, real quick, the question on that, right? So I know, again, going back to what I said earlier, there is a variety of newspaper clippings and also photographs supposedly showing some of the uncovering of the burial grounds and some of the things like this of these giants. But then we have a story like the Kandahar giant, which I'm sure you're familiar with, where
of course, the cave giants.
Yeah, that supposedly, for those who aren't familiar with it, a U.S. military patrol, probably U.S. Army patrol that was out in Afghanistan came across a cave system, and that patrol went missing, right? And then Special Forces was deployed to go basically track them down and figure out what happened. And there's claims that some of these guys that are Special Forces came across these sort of like, I guess, a bunch of the gear from the guys who went missing, and also human bones and human remains that had clearly been eaten by something. And then out emerged from this cave system this 10 plus foot tall giant that was red haired and had a spear and like killed one of the Special Forces guys or something like that. And then they were able to subdue him and then get him on a plane and get him out of there. And then they flew the body of this giant to Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan. And then he was flown somewhere else in secrecy. That's the story. And there are whistleblowers behind this story. So like, what I'm getting at is this idea that giants were a thing of the past. I think a lot of people can get on board with pretty easily, but there might be some indication that they're still around, and they might be operating primarily in these cave systems and underground tunnels and networks. I know that sounds absolutely nuts, but I'd just love to hear your perspective on it.
Well, sure. We can come back to America to an even more, in my opinion, substantiated example, and that's Lovelock Cave. I cover this in Nevada episode. I have 3 or 4 examples in that article, but they found the remains. So the Native Americans have said stories like this forever, all across the realm. And so one part of the Kandahar story that you didn't touch on was the locals knew this. They said, yeah, some of these caves you don't go in because you don't come back. And it was, demons, devils, jinn, all kinds of stuff. But many of them would say there were giants. And I've also heard stories about people in Afghanistan, military people, that said occasionally they would find people in Afghanistan that were humongous. Like, obviously, with the basketball narrative and the kind of idea of a 7-foot tall person is not outlandish here in America. But we're talking 8-foot tall people in Afghanistan. And it wasn't just one or two. And many of them were recruited by the Taliban because of their size. And they said that there were examples of this even in the cities, and that the locals would substantiate, these caves are full of these devils. But again, going back to what I was saying about Lovelock, the myth was that the Native Americans in that region had been warring with giants for generation. And this story idea is found all over. I cover them in every state that I find them. Wisconsin's a big one. Minnesota's a big one. All along the Mississippi, because the story in that region, in Michigan copper, right? Many of the natives in that region said the mines in Michigan were mines of giants who sailed from the east, and they came up the Mississippi, and they had massive mining operations with slaves in Michigan. And they had a smelting. I want to say it's Wisconsin. I should remember this, but I've done so many, it all blends together. I cover a few articles. I believe it's Wisconsin, where they found a stone city where they found all these smelting facilities. They knew it was a mining operation. And by testing the copper they found at the site, they could trace it to Michigan. Michigan's copper has a very definitive chemical structure, and they're able to easily show all these different tombs where Michigan copper's pulled out of, obviously indicating a very large trade network. That's for another time. But anyways, these stories exist amongst all the tribes in America, not all, but many, about giants. Many of them were evil. They sailed on crazy boats. They had technology. They avoided them for the most part, and they were cannibals. You go deep enough, and there's a lot of correlations with the Phoenicians. I don't really like that word, but men of the East. But yeah, the Lovelock story, again, they got the first people moving west, got these stories from the natives there. Oh yeah, giants, of course. We've known about them, and our generations have been fighting with them for centuries, or for generations. My grandfathers, blah, blah, blah. In fact, my grandfather and the tribe got into a fight with a bunch in Lovelock Cave. That's not what they called it, but this cave over here. And they killed them. They suffocated them. They trapped them in part of the cave and built a massive fire because they said that their weapons wouldn't pierce their skin. Kind of like the Kandahar story. I don't know if you've heard that part too, where they said they shot it several times and they didn't have any bullet holes. They said similar things. Their spears couldn't pierce their skin, and they lost many men, and they were cannibals. So anyways, the Lovelock story, well, years later, they go in there and they dig down like 10 feet because the cave had been flooded. So silt had over, who knows how long, centuries, perhaps 100 years, 200 years. The cave had slowly been filled with layers of floods. So it was about 8 or 10 feet down, and they dug up like 6 or 7 giants. I believe the average was 10 feet in size. So a story that they thought was completely ridiculous, they actually went in there and dug up the skeletons and took them all out. And it was a huge story in the town because, oh my gosh, this is real. This area was inhabited by giants. And then the natives are like, yeah, why don't any of you idiots listen to us?
You know what I just got the hit on that's sort of a retelling of this, but in good old Hollywood style, it flips it into aliens, is the Predator movies. If you think about the original Predator and then like its last Predator, which was called Prey, I loved Prey. I thought it was like as good as the first one. In those movies, you have essentially this massive being, let's just call it a giant, that, the human weapons can't really penetrate. It preys on the humans. It takes them out for sport. And that sounds like imagine, I could just see that, like, how, art imitates life a lot of times. And there'll be like certain stories that are just like, changed just enough to fit like the modern, programming and the modern milieu. But it was probably like when you had pioneers going into these certain areas, they would have had like a predator-like experience, not with laser beams and stuff, but like at least with like being the prey, like being hunted by these massive things.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, the warring with giants exists all across the realm. The Chinese have it, the Japanese have it. Everybody has it.
Well, they're so short anyway. Japanese, I mean, they think us white guys are Nephilim, so that doesn't.
It's true.
It's true. But I mean, I make
American with huge.
I make the Tolkien reference a lot. And Tolkien himself said that his stories were based on what he believed to be real. And, that he thinks the myths that are handed down throughout the ages aren't fairy tales. And I cover a lot of stuff from giants to ogres to dwarves. In my Nevada episode, when I get into the caves, they describe a race of people that have lived underground for their whole lives, multiple generations, cities underground. This is in Nevada. And they're dwarves. And they are miners. They live down there. And there are stories all across the realm of a race, short-statured, stocky people that live predominantly underground, and they mine jewels and precious metals, and they trade with the surface occasionally, but they're very peculiar about who they trade with. Pygmies, all that stuff. I touch on it a lot, and I say truth is stranger than fiction, and Tolkien was onto this, and I think his kind of stories of Middle Earth were, I don't want to say he was writing them about America, but I say America was very much a contrast with Tolkien's Middle Earth.
If you listen to this show, you are probably well aware that there's something seriously off with our modern food systems. And even a lot of food labeled organic isn't what it seems. Some of it's shipped in from China, where regulations are murky at best, and other times companies slap the USDA organic label on while cutting corners and doing the absolute bare minimum in order to achieve that label. That's why Dr. Cowan's Garden exists. Founded by Dr. Tom Cowan, they believe health starts with food, real food, the way that it's supposed to be grown. They call their sourcing beyond organic, which means they're working with small family-run farms who are going above and beyond the USDA organic label when it comes to growing their food. These farms care deeply about soil health and nutrient density, and some are even biodynamic certified, the highest farming standard in the world. At Dr. Cowan's Garden, they use proper processing techniques that humans have used for thousands of years because they actually work. Nuts and grains are soaked or sprouted just as traditional cultures did. Olive oils and apple cider vinegars are never heated, preserving fragile nutrients. Olive oil is protected from light because oxidation matters. The list goes on and on. The products at Dr. Cowan's Garden are made to be deeply nourishing and also incredibly delicious. Foods that you actually enjoy eating and foods that make healthy decisions actually feel good. Dr. Cowan's Garden is not about fads, it's not about fear, and it's definitely not about following government health recommendations. It's about reclaiming a simple trust in your food. If you value transparency, tradition, and food that respects both your body and nature, head to drcowansgarden.com or just head to the show notes and use code THEWAYFORWARD for 15% off your first order. Welcome back to Real Nourishment.
I just wonder how much of that is still going on, like with giants still roaming in these underground cave systems and networks, and the whole idea of Nephilim. I know Paul Staub is really big on that. And a subset, because this kind of relates, of the whole Tartarian crowd and like the ancient history crowd and the old world crowd has adopted this millennial reign perspective. And I actually am one who lends a lot of credence to that. I think there's a good indication that the whole millennial reign thing, us being in the midst of a little season right now, Christ has already returned. Obviously, we have Josephus's account. Topher, I know you've done a tremendous amount of research and uncovering on this, but I would just love to hear your perspective on how the quote unquote Tartaria thing fits into the millennial reign stuff and all that we're talking about here.
Certainly. Yeah. I mean, again, I like it a lot because when you go in again from just the construction perspective, what it would take, the infrastructure and technology that would already need to be in place to build these buildings and create the materials required to build these buildings, to have the educational systems already set up to educate the people to do this, to create these plans, to transport the materials, all of this, which again, we really can't prove 90% of the time how they transported most of the materials to these remote sites. Again, why I so often use these insane asylums is because they're often way out in the middle of nowhere. Like you could take a Capitol building. Well, they're often on waterways. They're often on train lines. But the insane asylums were almost always outside of town, and sometimes 10, 20, 30, 100 miles with nothing. Remember, the people that worked there lived on the premise. So there wasn't like a city that was, this was its own operating system. And they're out in the middle of nowhere. There's no riverways. I mean, and occasionally there is. There's no railroads. Occasionally there is. But those stand out the most as the biggest aha. And yeah, it's the Tartaria stuff and the millennial reign. I don't want to say those buildings are related to the millennial reign. Perhaps they were repurposed from this event. But no matter how you look at it, the world's population in the 1800s, 1700s was very small. I think even smaller than we're led to believe. And it was very, very large, maybe just 3 or 4 generations before that. Very, very large. That's the only way to explain these cities. Because again, I've already touched on and shown a lot of evidence that, and why I feel the way I do about these capital buildings in these capital cities where the populations were often 1,000 or less.
Dude, one of the biggest ones is San Francisco. Like that's one of the most obvious ones in my mind. It's hilarious.
Absolutely.
It's hilarious.
That's just one you've touched on. There are cities all over Nebraska, South Dakota, Iowa, where the population was under 1,000, and their Capitol buildings are unbelievable. 100 rooms, 200 rooms. They have 3 or 4 levels of basement. There is marble and granite from 8 different locations around the world. I mean, this is all of them.
Yeah.
So San Francisco, there's at least a little bit longer of a historical relationship there to support a population that could make this happen. And because it's on such a large body of water, I mean, we're talking central the United States here.
Right.
You know, in the grasslands where there was
flyover states right now. Even right now, like they're considered flyover states. Like no.
In a lot of the cities that we think of, like, you know, LA, San Francisco, Seattle, New York, most of those really amazing buildings were gone because they had the population to just take it apart, first of all, which is incredibly expensive and very laborious, and then rebuild. But in a lot of the flyover states, they were like, well, we want to get rid of this, but we need it. Right? That's actually, those smaller cities have the most natural representation of these cities as they were in the 1800s, where most, like Portland, my city, for example, when I was in middle school, they actually took us on a tour of subterranean Portland. That was what the whole tour was. 3 stories. And they're like, oh yeah, the whole purpose of this was the criminals. They had trap doors in all the bars, and they would Shanghai these men and put them on a boat. They'd be slaves.
That's what they said in LA too.
They built every building 3 stories taller so they could kidnap everybody. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous.
How about lifting the buildings? That's my favorite in Chicago. Yeah. We're just going to jack these buildings up. We're just going to jack them up. We're going to jack them up. Or
the grading that was happening all across the realm, but it's really only documented the most in Seattle, some places in Oklahoma. But are you familiar with that, Alec? The grading, the cities that were graded, hundreds of feet of earth removed, 6 million, 7 million cubic yards of earth removed. And it's the same thing. You see the pictures. There's a building at ground level at the bottom of the grading, and then there's buildings on the top of the grading. what are we doing? We have the population to support this and the finances? No, we don't. Oh, and there's railroad lines at the bottom of the grading. But anyways,
So I have a weird thing, and Alec, you can strike this if you don't like it.
I don't care. Go ahead. I love Topher weird things. It's good.
I really think the Twin Towers, the dustification of them was like the largest show of force in my lifetime. And I think in the entire, in the known historical things are on screens, I think that was the largest show of force, because you had the two largest buildings in the world where 85% of their mass was gone, just gone, bye-bye. The buildings went away. And then we see little other things where areas that are set up for new construction projects, I'll just keep it as benign as possible. You see towns like Paradise go away or Lahaina go away. And they have very similar signatures to what gets dustified, what will burn, what won't burn. All of them have signatures of no explosives as we know it, right? You don't see pitting. Alec, you were in the military. We all have guns. We've all blown stuff up. When you blow stuff up, usually there's shrapnel, there's things going in every direction. You get, collateral damage with these things. What you see in all of these events, I'll just call them, you see massive amount of destruction that is so perfectly isolated to the target. And the descriptions from the controlled opposition, from the main narrative, are so hideous in not going through just main things like what amount of energy would be needed. If this was a forest fire, why is none of the forest gone, but just the metal in the artificial things that are built, all the things, right? I am of the opinion that technology as we know it is rolled out. And it's rolled out in a very specific time frame. And that the technology that did the dustification of the Twin Towers was probably there when Chicago went down the first time. Or let's say San Francisco. How many times did San Francisco get burnt to the ground and get rebuilt? It was like a Monty Python thing.
Yeah.
Was it 4 times or something like that?
Yep, 3 or 4.
Yeah. I think that there was a technology that whoever, let's say the people that are bankrolling the Smithsonian, let's say that they have the old technological patents from, their Nephilim bloodlines. I think that tech is used all the time, where you'll have, industrial areas like you're talking about, the Southwest of the United States. That was annihilated. Let's call it what it was. It was annihilated. The different scientists that I've studied that have their land down there in Arizona, and they're they'll talk to me about the amount of ormus that they find, orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements. I said, I'm like, hey, do you know, you can get ormus from plasma? Plasma creates, massive beds of magnetite and ormus. And at the time they were unaware of that. But I really think that there is a technological superiority that is consistently used, but our ignorance to the real history doesn't allow us to kind of make the connect. Does that work for you at all?
Well, it's like the stories of the Mayan when the priestly men first arrived on their shores and they couldn't even describe the boat. Right? The idea that when you don't have a language to support what you're seeing, you actually can't even really see it, if that makes sense. So certainly, and it goes back to what we talked about first with Graham Hancock, one of the quote of his that sticks with me is there were creatures with amnesia. And, just because anyone that's dove into MK Ultra and how easy it is to manipulate thoughts and reasoning and memory with simple instruments, it's not crazy to think that a cataclysm of some kind could have easily had that kind of effect on the human psyche as a whole, and perhaps had a ripple effect through generations, where multiple people or multiple generations have that same amnesia, so to say. But yeah, it certainly seems likely. We're going back to the whole idea of the millennial reign. I also like the millennial. I do and don't like it for a lot of reasons, but I also do like it because how else can you describe a population so completely and utterly lost?
Right. Where every mainstream truth is an inversion of what is actually true, like across the board, across every field.
And how could that possibly be? It's like the Matrix idea. Again, I don't want to go to simulation theory on people, but no matter how deep you go, you will continually come to find that it seems like you're just reliving a script. That's why I said earlier about, I do believe everything's cyclical. The Druids, it didn't matter which priest class you dove into, at least for me, when I was on my spiritual journey, it doesn't matter what continent they were on, it's all the same. Humans go through an ebb and flow. Things get out of control, or there's a kind of a psychic wobble, and something happens and things start over, and we pick right up where we were. Again, whether that's some divine creator pressing play, pressing stop, or wiping the slate clean, or it's a big etch-a-sketch, it really is completely up to you to come to those conclusions. But yeah, like I said earlier, any one of these rabbit holes will eventually lead you to an endpoint where you have to kind of throw your hands up in the air and say, I really am not going to convince myself for certain of the real answer, why and how and when and all of those things. And again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, I truly believe we live in an enclosed system. Make of that what you will. And there are so many variables that are completely outside of our control that there's really only a few ways to explain that. And the fact that we live in a terrarium where the strings are being pulled from outside, it's by far the most logical explanation to me.
You know what?
All the rest are little details.
I'm sorry for keep making these movie analogies, but it's fitting to me. I was very resistant to watch any of the Mockingbird movies. What were these called? Hunger Games? Because when they came out, I was living in the jungle and none of it really resonated with me. And then I got sick. and got the DVDs for free. I was like, okay, I'll play these, whatever. And I was blown away because when they showed that clock world, right, where they were inside the terrarium, like you just said, and there were people from outside that were monitoring it and changing the conditions, and I was just like
steering the story.
I was just like,
it's the Truman Show reference, of course,
Yeah, but even like it was even because we're kind of talking about that along with the millennial reign aspect. Like for those of you that don't know what the millennial reign is, the notion is that Jesus already returned for 1,000 years. And in the book of Revelations, it says after he returns and has his millennial reign, he leaves and the devil is loosed a short while or a little season. So that you'll hear people talk about the little season. And the little season is this time of deceit where everything, like Alex said, is like it's an inversion. Anything that's worth knowing is you're literally told the 180-degree opposite of from the authority figures. The people that are being paid the most money, the people that are being funded from on high, are absolutely bought and paid for by interests that do not have your soul, don't have you anywhere in the cards for optimization. In fact, they want you sick and ill, if not dead, as long, like now. And so the little season makes sense because whether or not it's true or not, we're living in something of a little season where there is a very strong satanic agenda. We just saw all the stuff be like, you know, the blitzkrieg of information that's pretty much, you know, destroyed people's like, you know, it's way too much information about how a lot of these, you know, halls of power actually work. It is so demented and it's so low that it actually points to a spiritual life in a way. It actually points to the reality of Christ. Like it really does, because like there is this separation in consciousness. Like I say this all the time, very conscious people create beautiful things. And like, it's not only that we're talking about the size of these buildings and the intricacy. I mean, the beauty, that's consciousness. That's not
like set aside that we're talking about the Texas state capitol and the government is the one who occupies it. You go into that building, dude. It's incredible. It invokes a sense of awe and wonder. It's like this was inspired creation without question.
And how do you explain thousands and thousands of examples of that?
Right.
All across the realm with mathematical precision, unbelievable expertise. Yeah, it's a tough one.
So I didn't mean to cut you off, Topher, by the way, if you had something else to say.
Oh, no. I mean, that was a perfect thing to say. It's just, we have the beautiful contrast here. We can see what timetables and slave labor does now. Even people that have unlimited budgets, what they build now can't hold a candle to things that we're told were built just a couple hundred years ago. They don't even come close. You go to Dubai, you go to United Arab Emirates, you go to all these places where money isn't even a question mark. Budgets are signed off on. You have unlimited Indian and Pakistani labor, like go, just build. Those places are dog shit compared to what our forefathers who were fighting a three-front war, farmsteading, homesteading. Like, I'm sorry, like it was a different consciousness that built those buildings. And to me, that consciousness refers back to inspiration. It refers back to people that were walking with God.
Yeah. The reference I always go back to is Philadelphia City Hall.
Yes.
Obviously, there are thousands of examples, but I like this one the most just because the story about it is so ridiculous and like really drives a lot of what we've been talking about home. You know, they wanted to tear this building down and they actually couldn't because it said it would bankrupt the United States. The entire government would be bankrupt to tear down this building. This building is absolutely insane. For anybody that doesn't know what I'm talking about, just pull up an image of it and, you know, forget everything we've talked about in this podcast. You do a deep dive into this building and you are going to be absolutely astonished. And I had a listener reach out who was a maintenance employee on this building and said there's at least 5 stories below ground. And this building is like, I can't remember what it is. I think it's like 500 rooms. I really should just wiki this real quick. But I think it's like 500, maybe 600 rooms. The walls are like 7 feet thick.
Because that's what you do. I mean, that's what you do.
We got to get rid of this building. Like, we could build so much cooler stuff here. And then they come back.
Dude, you are off. It's close to 700 rooms.
And he said he's pretty sure that number doesn't count for because they actually don't report the actual amount of stories below ground.
So let me just give people context. I build out of the contractors that out there, I build the thickest walls out there. My walls start at 2 feet thick. The average house, just to give you context, if you're doing wood framing for a first story, it's 8 inches thick. For the second story, it's 6 inches thick. If you're doing CBS construction, which is concrete block construction, If you have a good contractor and a really big budget, they're doing 12-inch CBS, which means you have a 14-inch wall. My walls are 24 to 26 inches thick. People are like, Gardner, you're crazy, man. Why would you do a wall so thick? And I'll tell you, it's not the cheapest way to go, but I have to do it for tension for my domes. And like I'm telling you, to do a dome, like last summer at this time, we did a dome that was 42 feet in diameter. The stem wall of it was this 2-foot thick wall by 4 feet tall. That was 100 tons. 100 tons of material. Just to give you, for 4 feet of a 42 foot.
Can I share my screen?
Yeah, please do.
There's a image I posted on social media a lot over the years, but it's one of the oldest pictures. I believe it's like 1890 or 1895, something along there, of the Philadelphia City Hall building. And it is one of the most burned into my mind images when I first saw this picture, probably 20 years ago. That I just immediately looked at it and was like, what is this realm we live in? And yeah, the building's insane. So like you mentioned, Topher. Anyways, this image is just incredible. And again, why I fell in love with archives and the, oldest photos I could find. And you just find pictures like this in every capital city of all the states, but not just capitals, random cities that make no sense for their placement or being at all. But yeah, this building is just incredible. When you look into the story of why they tried to tear it down and how why they decided not to, is just absolutely insane. But yeah, just look at that thing, and imagine another 5 or 6 stories below ground. And like you said, 700 rooms. I mean, how are we explaining anything? This building right here just blew my mind. And I thought to myself, how is any of the numbers or construction methods or stories? This building is even more insane. The amount of granite and marble in this building, there's absolutely no logical reason why you would put this kind of investment into something like this.
I mean, you could just feel it. Like my heart opens up. Like that is just, you will never know what it takes to build until you do it, let alone the amount of detail that goes into this. And this is something where I have a real beef with a lot of people that poo-poo our line of inquiry, is that anybody can look at a picture like this, and if you have decent artistic talent, you can draw an elevation, which means you can find the proportionality of things, and then you can essentially draw a 2D planar view of one side and give elevations, especially if you have details of the building. What a lot of people that detract our line of query do is they mistake elevations for blueprints. In a lot of the articles that you've read throughout the years, Ben, how many of buildings like this have you ever seen blueprints for?
Yeah, none of them. They don't exist.
None. But you might see elevations. And this is where I want to punch some people out. Is I'm like, you've obviously never built. You're looking at an elevation and you're calling it a blueprint. You can't build from an elevation. Like blueprints are literally like a book. Could you imagine the blueprints for a building like this? Like the blueprints would be literally a Bible. It would be thicker than the Bible, and it would take up your entire drafting table.
And through this whole journey, I've looked into construction methods for like really large buildings, and it's not just the blueprints that are mind blowing. It's the categorical organization of deliveries. They can't just go, hey, let's get all the stone we need and deliver that, and then we'll start. No, it has to come in increments, scheduled literally perfectly. The pipe, the copper, the marble. You can't finish the marble inside and have all the marble you need for the rest of the room sitting outside. it would take up 100 acres. People just haven't seen how a skyscraper that's built in a big city like this, where there's not a lot of room to store items, how intricate just the trafficking and delivery and the schedule required just for the materials, and how it literally has to land hourly. Like, when you look into building skyscrapers in big cities, that is actually the most difficult part. And they'll say that time and time again. It's not even close to the blueprints. It's just organizing and delivering the materials on a schedule for years, in a row with no hiccups.
Well, an example of that is the Minnesota State Capitol building, dude. Like, they were getting white marble from, I think it was Georgia. It's like thousands of miles away, though, like at least 1,000 miles away.
And think of a storm, a problem on the river, a delivery. Again, there's so many variables to this. People just, because they don't have any experience or they've never looked into it, they don't understand. They can't wrap their mind around what it actually would take to build that building, let alone in the 1800s.
And have it be perfect.
Let alone have not only that, but thousands of these buildings are going up at the same time.
Right. That's such a great point.
And we don't even have the infrastructure. Again, people are going to say, oh, the railroads were there. They shipped this, the amount, the service. Imagine the size of a shipping company, how efficient and effective and how many employees it would take just to be shipping all the materials for all these buildings up the Mississippi. Think of all the cities that are getting their materials from the Missouri and the Mississippi, all the buildings that are going up from the 1880s to 1900. It's thousands of buildings. And how many different companies it would take and organizing to have all these. It's just absolutely mind boggling. There's not enough people to build the buildings, let alone the shipping, the quarrying, and all the other things that go into building these buildings. People don't think about any of that.
And look at the dude at the top. Okay. Now, there is a statue that, given the proportionality of that building, that statue is close to 20 feet tall. Look at that. I see statues of sports icons now being made that are so horrible.
Dude,
they're so
true.
bad.
So bad.
I bet you at the top of that building, you got a perfect bronze statue of like, yeah. And let's just, for shits and giggles, put it up 100 feet. Like, let's just do that. Like, come on, guys. Like, it's a different consciousness. It's a totally different consciousness.
Well, and again, let's just pretend, for entertainment's sake, pretend, why on earth would a government that's barely finding enough money to finance wars and developing West say, you know what sounds like a great idea? Let's dismantle this building. If it was going to bankrupt America to tear it down, where'd the money come from to build it?
Right.
If we're all in a checks and balances society, that right there fucks the whole thing up. It just tears the whole story to pieces.
Look at this statue of Dwayne Wade.
Yeah, like what's
so bad?
It's so bad. Dude.
Oh, he's standing in front of it too. That's the best picture. He's like, this thing is horrible.
Yeah, you saw the reaction video of him looking at it. It's so funny.
It's so bad. And they spent, I bet you that's like the third or fourth version. I bet you they were like, oh my God, we have to put this out there. We keep doing this. And I mean, that's so bad.
So bad, dude. Sorry, Ben, I interrupted.
No problem at all. I mean, again, like we could do that. We could do one subject because we bounce around for the sake of, fitting a lot of information in a short window of time. And hopefully we can do this again and we can just maybe narrow it down to 2 or 3 subjects and then we can go deeper into the material. I say this every time I do these interviews and it rarely happens. but kind of the proof is in the pudding. And I think the real, I don't want to say entertainment value, but shock value is actually in these articles, like the few that I read about Texas. And that's every state. I mean, it's just mind blowing every state. I started with Alaska because everyone's like, oh, it's Alaska. It's so remote. It's barren. It's freezing, but Alaska is covered. They find frozen cities, entire cities, frozen streets, you name it. I mean, it's just, that's why I started there, because I thought it would be the most like eye-opening and shocking. And then I get into the giants and the crazy animals and the tropical stuff they find. There was an earthquake and a whole half of a mountainside slid down, and it revealed that the whole mountain was actually a city.
Whoa.
And it was all Greek. That's what they called it. Greek style architecture.
Wild.
And that's just, again, one of hundreds of the articles that I cover throughout this whole thing. So,
well, Ben, we're going to get you back on for sure. Like, if you want, as long as Topher over here will be my Dr. Bear Lando for these.
Yes, I'll be your daddy. I'll come back and be your daddy.
Since you're in Texas, we could probably go a little deeper into Texas. Texas has a ton of stuff. I said it over and over again in that episode, and I remember, there's some states I could do 10 hours. Some states, 2 hours, 3 hours is pretty good. But Texas is one of those states that's unbelievable. And you mentioned the Capitol buildings. You should, on your own time, start looking into the universities.
Okay.
Texas universities are another one where you're like, there's 100 students, and then look at this building. And there's 10 of them. Explain this to me.
when tuition didn't cost anything.
Yeah, tuition didn't cost anything. That's such another good point. Or even the school that I went to, dude. I really struggle around the narrative on like how West Point was built. I went to the United States Military Academy at West Point. It literally looks like Hogwarts. Like it's a castle. And yeah.
They took over the remnants. It's all repurposing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or Oregon, another great state. A lot of people don't know much about Oregon. It's one of those kind of overlooked states. There were like 4 or 5 huge universities from the 1800s here where they're built. They're not built in main cities. Eugene, small town. In the 1800s, nobody. Corvallis, small town, 1800s, nobody. They were the schoolhouses and buildings, unbelievable. The most magnificent buildings in the entire state. And they're all in tiny little towns where there's not even a population of people that are in college to go that would warrant these buildings. But there's like a dozen universities that are all built between like 1880 and 1900 that, again, follow the same narrative we've been saying over and over and over, where the math ain't mathin'.
Yeah, no way. I guess as a final question to you, Ben, and this may seem rhetorical, but I mean it. Why are you so interested in this? I mean, I have my reasons of why I'm so interested, but I'd just love to hear from your perspective.
To make a long story short, in 2007, I had a motorcycle accident and was nearly paralyzed. And in that accident, I had a near-death experience. I left my body and watched myself have the accident. I felt no pain. I didn't experience anything that my physical body experienced. I then left that visual experience and was pulled back into my body, and then had all of the horrible physical ailments that came with it. And I remember telling my mother about what I saw, about what happened. And my mother worked in the medical field her whole life. And she explained to me, in these situations, people have all kinds of crazy experiences. And we left it there. She's like, you created all these, your body just creates, it's just flooded with chemicals, endorphins, et cetera, adrenaline. And people have these experiences. Well, along with that accident came almost a year of serious rehab, a lot of that being bedridden. And nobody's answer fulfilled my questioning. So I looked into near-death experiences. I bought like 10 books that started it all. I was like, okay, I don't believe what you're telling me. I remember asking, I was having to see I had a brain injury through the process, and I was having to have brain scans, and I was talking to different people and some of the neurologists, and got the same answers. Nothing resonated with me. I didn't see God or have an angelic experience or anything like that, but I can remember it like it was yesterday. And that was the point in my life. It took a big pivot, which is common for a lot of people in those instances. And I stopped listening to anybody and I just started answering my own questions. And I do that with everything in my life. It started there. It went into food. It went into everything. It's again, that snowball. It was like, well, the answers I got were from all these people who were in my shoes. They were like, oh, they were just telling it away. They were just like, it happens. It's nothing. And then they looked into it and they found other people that had these same experiences and blah, 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 blah. It led me to a book called The Proof of Heaven by, I believe he was a neuroscientist or neurologist. I can't remember exactly, who got a brain virus that was eating his brain away, and he was having hallucinations and he was having out-of-body experiences. He decided to dedicate his life to explaining these out-of-body states that people experience in these types of events. And the book is incredible, changed my life. Again, it's
Even Alexander. Yeah, Even Alexander.
Incredible book. And just set me on this path that, okay, I need to look into alternative research and other people that have been through this. I want to find people that have walked in my shoes, because then that's where you get a more authentic explanation. And yeah, I haven't looked back. That was 20 years ago. So newspapers, I found a bomb on my school when I was in middle school. And I was in the newspaper and the bomb squad came. And I mean, it was a huge thing. The whole neighborhood gathered around. They blew up the bomb. And I told a friend this story in college and they didn't believe me. So I had to go back to the library and this is before digital archives, and look through analog newspapers, because they kept I can't remember what it was, 20 years or so of newspapers. And they were like, oh yeah, we're working on digitizing this. This is a whole new thing at the time. Because at the time you had to look at these slides that they took photos of the newspaper and you had to find the slides. So anyways, I was like, oh, this is incredible. It's being digitized. She's like, yeah, soon you'll be able to, this is what the librarian said. Soon you'll be able to read newspapers from the 1800s. There's kind of, I guess, like a prequel to what I would be experiencing later on in my life. But yeah, that's a long story made short, what's led me to this point in my life.
That's rad, dude. That's so cool.
Yeah. So I'm grateful. And sometimes that's what it takes for people to wake up, so to say, is a real traumatic experience, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. Same thing in my family's life. I know that Topher has had many of those experiences too. It's how it goes. So yeah. That's amazing, man. Well, Topher, thank you for being my co-host, dude. I appreciate you. Ben, thank you so much. If you haven't checked out Ben's YouTube, please head to the show notes. And if you're not someone who's interested in watching the videos, but just likes reading the articles associated with them, I'll also link that thread that you sent me, Ben, in the show notes as well. And love to get you back on to explore some more of the specific subtopics in depth at some point too.
That'd be fantastic. I'd love that. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, fellas. Thanks, guys.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
See you guys.